Emily Grace had always considered herself a logical thinker, the kind of young woman who didn't put much stock in fairy tales or religious fables. At just 22 years old, she was a psychology student at a well-respected university in Nashville, Tennessee, juggling her classes, a part-time job at a local bookstore, and long morning runs that helped clear her mind before lectures. Her days were full, structured, and driven by facts. Textbooks, research articles, and lectures from neuroscientists who explained away every aspect of the human experience through chemical reactions and brain patterns. To Emily, the soul was merely a poetic term. Heaven was wishful thinking, and hell, well, that was the stuff of old religious fear tactics. She respected faith. Sure, her grandmother had been a faithful Southern Baptist who read her Bible every morning before sunrise, but Emily had long since traded hymns for headlines and Sunday services for study groups. She was raised in a middle-class home with good values and good intentions. Her parents, both school teachers, encouraged education, critical thinking, and community service. They went to church on Christmas and Easter, said grace over Thanksgiving dinner, and taught her to be kind, to work hard, and to chase her dreams. But as she got older, the spiritual roots of her upbringing began to dry out. By the time she reached college, religion was no longer part of her worldview. She wasn't angry at God, she just didn't see the need for one. In a world filled with science, data, and psychology, who needed miracles? It was on a Wednesday morning, sunny, mild, a comfortable 68 degrees, that Emily's worldview began to crumble in the most unexpected way. She had been at her campus gym halfway through a 5-mile run on the treadmill. Heart-pounding music blasting in her earbuds, the rhythm of her stride steady and practiced. Suddenly, without warning, her chest tightened. Not the kind of tightness you shake off or chalk up to dehydration, but a deep, crushing pressure, like someone had placed a concrete block right in the center of her rib cage. Her vision blurred. The room spun. She stumbled forward, hands grasping for the treadmill rails, but her legs buckled beneath her and she collapsed. What happened next would later be called a rare electrical malfunction of the heart, an undiagnosed condition known as arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, a condition often silent until it isn't. By the time the gym staff reached her, Emily's heart had stopped. Her pulse was gone. Paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes and CPR was performed for nearly 10. She was clinically dead for just over 5 minutes before being revived. But while the emergency room was flooded with frantic movement, defibrillator pads shouted instructions, EKG printouts, Emily was somewhere else entirely, somewhere no textbook had ever prepared her for. Her mother, who received the call while driving home from the grocery store, arrived at the hospital in tears, clutching Emily's favorite hoodie and a half-empty bag of apples. She remembered thinking how surreal it all felt, how 1 minute her daughter had been healthy, laughing, making plans for the weekend, and the next, she was being told her little girl had no heartbeat for 5 terrifying minutes. It's a miracle she's alive, the doctor told her, disbelief still etched into his face. And even more miraculous that she came back with no brain damage. Cases like this, they just don't happen. But what none of them understood, not the ER doctors, not the EMTs, not even her tearful mother, was that something had happened. Something extraordinary, something unexplainable. Because Emily Grace didn't just survive death, she remembered it. Vividly. She remembered leaving her body. She remembered seeing everything from above. She remembered the light. And more than anything else, she remembered him. What she experienced during those 5 minutes would haunt her, change her, and ultimately lead her down a path that would terrify, inspire, and awaken everyone who heard her story. But for Emily, it all began on that treadmill. When logic failed, science went silent, and eternity cracked open. The doctors said she was gone for just over 5 minutes. But in those 5 minutes, Emily Grace lived through something that felt like a lifetime. Something so real, so vivid, that the memory of it would forever burn into her soul. One moment she was lying lifeless on a gym floor in Nashville. The next she was floating, disconnected from everything she had ever known. There was no fear, no panic, not even a sense of confusion. Just silence, stillness, peace. And then, awareness. Complete and startling awareness. She opened her eyes, or rather felt them open, though she had no physical form. She could see the scene, unfolding beneath her with crystal clarity. Her body lay motionless, gym staff hovering, a man kneeling to administer chest compressions, his hands trembling as he shouted her name. She saw her own face, blue, still foreign. She saw her friend, Megan, standing nearby, tears spilling down her cheeks, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. She watched as paramedics rushed through the gym doors, as the defibrillator pads were placed on her chest. But none of it touched her. None of it felt real anymore. Because something else had already begun. A warm light appeared in the distance, not harsh or blinding, but soft, like the sunrise after a long winter night. It pulled her in, not with force, but with invitation. It was a light that didn't just shine on her, it knew her. Every thought, every scar, every hidden fear. And as she moved toward it, though there was no walking, no sense of limbs or gravity, she felt herself filling with a peace deeper than anything this world had ever offered. The stress of finals, the pressure to succeed, the long nights of doubt and anxiety, all of it faded as if it had never mattered in the first place. And then, she was there. Heaven. She doesn't know how else to describe it, except to say it was more real than any moment of her earthly life. The air itself shimmered with a kind of golden clarity, filled with colors she'd never seen, blues deeper than the Atlantic greens, richer than an Appalachian forest in fall, and whites so pure they seemed to hum with sound. The ground beneath her feet felt alive, like every blade of grass carried memory, emotion, and music. And then in the midst of that radiance, she saw him. He didn't need to introduce himself. She knew him instantly, not because of any painting or church sermon, but because her soul leapt in recognition. Jesus, not a fable, not a metaphor, not a comforting concept for those afraid to die, but real, as real as the pulse she once had. His presence was overwhelming, not in a fearful way, but in a deeply personal way. He was majesty cloaked in gentleness, holiness wrapped in compassion. His eyes held galaxies, yet when he looked at her it was as though she were the only person who had ever mattered. She fell to her knees, if one could call it kneeling in that place, overcome by love. Not the kind of love that comes and goes, not the kind dependent on merit or performance, but the kind that sees every failure, every doubt, and still reaches out with arms wide open. He didn't speak aloud. He didn't need to. His words filled her from the inside out. "Welcome home, my child." Emily wept not from sadness, but from relief. This was where she belonged. This was what every heartache, every longing, every sleepless night had been pointing toward. Here there was no striving, no loneliness, no uncertainty, just perfect, unshakable belonging. But then his gaze shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was something deeper, something urgent. "You cannot stay," he said, though his lips never moved. "Your purpose is not yet complete." Emily's heart, if she still had one, ached. "But I don't want to go back," she pleaded. "Everything here is right." Jesus knelt beside her, reaching out with hands marked by scars that pulsed with light. "Love is the greatest commandment," he said. "Let it be the foundation of all that you do. There are those who need to hear what you've seen. There is still more for you to learn and to share." And just like that, the light began to fade. The music, the colors, the warmth, it all slipped away like morning mist. Emily felt herself falling not down but back, rushing towards something heavy, dim, loud. She gasped. Air filled her lungs like fire. Her body convulsed. The beeping of hospital monitors stabbed the silence. Nurses shouted. Her mother cried out her name. And as she blinked against the fluorescent lights of the ER, one truth thundered louder than any voice around her. She had met Jesus, and he had sent her back. A year passed since Emily Grace's first death. Though she returned to her life in Tennessee with a fire in her heart and a mission etched in her soul, the demands of the everyday had a way of smothering that fire. College classes resumed work, shifts crept in, friends needed her attention, and bills didn't stop just because she'd seen eternity. At first, she told everyone who would listen, her church, her professors, even her skeptical father. I saw Jesus. I was in heaven. I was told to live a life rooted in love. But after a while, people grew uncomfortable. The smiles became stiff. The interest faded. Maybe you just dreamed it, one of her classmates suggested. Near-death hallucinations are common. Emily forced a polite smile, but deep down her soul stirred restlessly. She knew better. She had been there. But soon the fire that once burned brightly began to flicker. The radiance of heaven felt like a dream slipping through her fingers. She still believed, but she began to drift not out of rebellion, but from weariness. She told herself she had more time to figure things out, that she'd rekindle her spiritual passion tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. And then one evening, while brushing her teeth, tomorrow was taken from her. It started as a dull pressure in her chest. Annoying, but bearable. Within seconds, it escalated sharp, crushing like a boulder pressing down on her ribcage. She clutched the bathroom counter, her toothbrush falling into the sink, her vision tunneling. Her knees buckled. The tile floor met her with a thud. The last thing she saw was the fluorescent ceiling light spinning above her and then blackness. But this time there was no light. No soft warmth. No familiar pull upward. Instead she fell. Hard, downward, faster than gravity should allow. The air thickened, choked with sulfur and smoke. The heat was stifling. Not a warm heat like summer, but an oppressive, rancid heat that clung to her spirit like wet wool. She landed, if one could call it that, on something soft and shifting like ash or decay. The stench hit her first. Rotting flesh, sulfur, burnt hair. It turned her insides out. Then came the sounds. Not moaning, not crying, screaming, tormented guttural wails ripped from the depths of human despair. Her eyes, if she still had eyes, adjusted to the gloom. All around her were figures, twisted, contorted, crawling and writhing. Some begged, others cursed. But the worst were the ones who said nothing, just wept, shoulders trembling, their mouths open in silent agony. It was hell. Not symbolic, not metaphorical. Real. Emily's instinct was to run, but her feet wouldn't move. Fear, like she had never known, surged through her. This was no dream. This was not an oxygen-starved hallucination. This was judgment. And she was standing in it. Suddenly something grabbed her ankle. A hand. A claw. It was cold and wet and desperate. She screamed, kicking wildly. But then light. It burst through the darkness like a storm tearing through a black sky. The shadows hissed and recoiled. The heat lessened. And then he appeared, Jesus. Radiant, steady, and sorrowful. He stood in the middle of that wretched place, his presence silencing the screams. Emily fell to her knees. Please, she gasped. Get me out of here. But Jesus didn't take her hand. Not yet. You need to see, he said. And with a wave of his hand, the veil lifted. She saw them, not monsters or criminals, but people. Real people, mothers, fathers, teenagers. People who had once laughed, worked jobs, gone to church. Some had denied God outright, but others were like her, lukewarm, distracted, always saying later. Jesus spoke without anger but with heartbreaking clarity. They believed they had time, but they waited too long. Emily sobbed. Can't they leave? Can't they be saved? They made their choice, he answered. I didn't send them here. They chose life without me. She looked at their faces twisted in horror, pleading for another chance. And then she heard a voice, screaming, Please, just one more chance. Let me warn them. Shattered her heart. That could have been her. Jesus turned to her. His face now carried a grave urgency. The world believes it has time, but it doesn't. Go. Warn them. And just like that, the darkness vanished. She gasped, her lungs burning, her body drenched in sweat. Her mother was screaming. Nurses were yelling. Emily had flatlined for 6 full minutes. But she was back, only now. She carried the weight of hell on her soul, and the message burned deeper than ever. Time is running out. Coming back from hell changed everything for Emily. She was no longer simply a college girl with a powerful testimony. She was now a vessel, a warning sign walking among people who were asleep to eternity. The first time she died, she returned with wonder. The second time, with fear. But it was after the third death that urgency took root in her bones like fire she couldn't put out. For weeks following her second return, she shared her testimony with anyone willing to listen. Churches, support groups, strangers on buses. Some wept, some mocked, some shrugged it off. It didn't matter. Emily pressed forward because she had seen what waited on the other side. She had seen both heaven's glory and hell's agony, and every day her soul cried out, They need to know. Time is running out. But one night, just as she began to feel that her mission was taking root, something happened, something she hadn't anticipated. She had been journaling at her desk when a wave of unease washed over her. It wasn't fear. It was deeper than that. It was as if the very earth groaned beneath her. Her heart began to race without cause. The pen slipped from her hand. Something was coming. Something she couldn't stop. Then pain, sharp electric paralyzing, ripped through her chest. Her limbs went numb. Her vision shattered into shards of white. Her knees buckled and her head hit the floor with a sickening thud. Then nothing. No light. No fall. No voice. Only force. This time it wasn't an ascent to heaven or a descent into hell. She was pulled, ripped from her body by something she couldn't see, couldn't reason with. And her spirit was dragged across dimensions faster than thought, until she came to an abrupt halt. When she opened her eyes, or whatever served as her eyes in this form, she was standing in what looked like Earth. But it wasn't the Earth she had left. The sky was dark, but not with night. It was filled with smoke, thick, acrid, choking. Buildings lay in ruin. Roads cracked open like dry clay. People ran in all directions, screaming, clutching children, weeping. Earthquakes shook the ground beneath her feet. Fires raged through forests. Floods swallowed entire coastlines. It was the end. She didn't need anyone to explain it. Her soul recognized the truth. This was the end of the age. Then from above the sky split, not with lightning, but with something divine. A presence filled the heavens, and she heard his voice. Jesus, this is what is coming, he said. Emily wept. She could hardly breathe. It was chaos unlike anything she had ever imagined. And yet, it wasn't the destruction that terrified her most. It was what she saw in the people. Amid the storms, the fires, the shaking earth, people didn't turn to God. They turned away. She saw churches empty, abandoned, crosses torn down. People mocked those who still believed. Others followed a false light, a being that appeared good, but radiated deception. It was smooth, beautiful, captivating, but behind it was something ancient and evil. And people followed it in droves, believing they had found salvation, when in truth, they were being led into darkness. The great deception, Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. They will call darkness light and light darkness. Many will be led astray. Emily fell to her knees. Why can't they see? Because they have chosen comfort over truth, control over faith, entertainment over holiness. Then the scene changed again. Emily was standing before an endless throne, brilliant, blazing with divine power. Before it stood billions, men, women, children, people from every nation. One by one, each soul stepped forward into the light, and nothing was hidden. Every secret thought, every cruel word, every selfish action, all exposed not to condemn but to reveal the truth of who they were. Some fell on their knees in repentance, sobbing. Others couldn't bear the light and turned away, covering their eyes, but there was nowhere to run. And then she saw it. Some were welcomed with open arms. Their faces were radiant, their joy unmistakable. They had followed Jesus in life and now stood before him, unashamed. But the rest, they had chosen to live without him. And so in the end, he honored their choice. They weren't dragged away. They simply stepped into darkness because they could not bear the light. Emily turned to Jesus, her heart shattered. Please let me go back. Let me warn them. Jesus' eyes, infinite pools of sorrow and urgency, met hers. The world is asleep, he said, but I am still calling. Time is short. Tell them to wake up. Then with one final look, he placed his hand over her heart, and she woke up gasping, convulsing, alive. Doctors shouted. Machines beeped. Her mother screamed. But Emily wasn't focused on them. She had seen the end, and now she had to sound the alarm before time ran out. Emily's third return from death was unlike the others. The first time she came back with wonder. The second time she came back with trembling fear. But now she carried something even heavier, urgency. Every breath she took felt like borrowed time. Each tick of the clock a drumbeat echoing toward a final moment the world was sprinting toward blindly. She had stood in the middle of the apocalypse, seen the fire and the floods, heard the thunder of judgment, and looked into the eyes of Jesus as he said, "Tell them." That command burned in her bones. It consumed her waking hours, haunted her dreams, and reshaped the way she saw everything. She no longer viewed the world as most did. To others, life carried on as usual: grocery runs, school pickups, dinner parties, weekend sales, Sunday church. But to Emily, everything had changed. She could see it in people's eyes, so many walking around, distracted, glued to screens, numbing their spirits with entertainment, fear, or busyness. She'd pass churches on her way home and feel an ache when she saw how many pews sat empty. Where were the people? Didn't they realize the storm was coming? She tried. Lord knows she tried. Emily shared her testimony in churches big and small, from packed megachurches in Dallas to modest congregations in rural Ohio. She spoke at youth camps, women's conferences, community events, anywhere they'd let her. Online, her story gained traction. One video hit over 1 million views in less than a week. People called her the girl who died 3 times. Some praised her, some called her crazy, and some called her a liar. But she didn't care. They had to know. Still, something deeper unsettled her. The more she spoke, the more she realized how hardened people's hearts had become. One pastor smiled politely as she described her vision of judgment and replied, "That's powerful, sister, but we don't focus on fear. Our message is grace." Another church told her they wouldn't be inviting her back. "It's just too heavy," the elder explained. "Our folks want uplifting messages. This kind of talk scares people. Scares people. Emily wanted to scream. They should be scared. She had seen hell. She had watched souls wail with regret. She had stood before the throne and seen people's sins laid bare. She had heard Jesus say, "Time is short." And the church was asking for something more encouraging. Her spirit grieved. But even more heartbreaking were the everyday conversations. At a family gathering, her cousin asked half-jokingly, "So how was hell?" Others laughed awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. One aunt pulled her aside and whispered, "Sweetheart, we all believe in Jesus. You don't have to keep scaring folks. Just live your life and be thankful you're okay. Be thankful I'm okay." Emily wanted to say, "I died 3 times to bring this warning and no one's listening." The burden grew heavier. She began to feel isolated, surrounded by crowds, but unseen. Her phone buzzed less and less. Some of her friends stopped returning calls. Even a few churches that had initially welcomed her began to distance themselves. "Too intense," one pastor texted. "You're giving people anxiety." At first, the rejection hurt. But then Emily remembered the sorrow in Jesus' eyes. They do not see what is coming. He had told her. So she pressed on. She rewrote her testimony into a book. "Awake, What I Saw After I Died 3 Times." She poured her story into every page, raw and unfiltered. She spoke on podcasts, radio shows, and even local television. Her message never changed. Hell is real. Heaven is real. Judgment is real. And Jesus is coming back sooner than we think. She didn't sugarcoat it. Not anymore. She was done worrying about who was offended. This wasn't about opinions. It was about souls. Late at night, she'd lie awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the dim light of her bedroom, replaying the visions over and over. The faces, the screams, the look in Jesus' eyes. She would whisper, "I'm trying, Lord. I'm trying." And sometimes in the silence, she'd feel it again, that presence, that warmth, and hear the faintest whisper, "Keep going." Emily knew she couldn't save everyone, but if even one person turned back, if even one soul woke up, dropped to their knees, and said, "Yes, Jesus," then it would be worth it. She hadn't been brought back from death to be popular. She had been sent back to warn the sleeping. And she would not stop. The story of Emily's 3 near-death experiences delivers a powerful and sobering message. Eternity is real, and the choices we make in this life echo far beyond our final breath. For older audiences who have seen how fleeting time can be, her testimony is a wake-up call not to delay what matters most. It reminds us that being a good person is not enough. What truly matters is a sincere relationship with Jesus Christ, not just belief in his existence, but daily surrender to his will. Heaven and hell are not metaphors. They are destinies. And while many may live as if there's always tomorrow to turn to God, the truth is time is not guaranteed. The most haunting part of Emily's journey is not the vision of hell or even the chaos of judgment, but the deep regret of those who had believed they had time. For those in their later years, this story affirms that it's never too late to choose Christ, but it is urgent. The message is clear. Live each day with purpose, seek truth over comfort, and remember that love and obedience to God are the only things we carry into eternity. The time to choose is now.